Sir, can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much.
May I call Anthony Utting, please?
Repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Utting. My name is Jason Beer and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Can you give us your full name, please?
Anthony Richard Utting.
Thank you. Thank you for giving evidence to the inquiry today and for the provision of a witness statement to the inquiry. You should have a copy of that witness statement in the bundle in front of you. It's 25 pages in length, dated the 23rd of October, 2023. Can you take that out, please, in volume 1 at tab A1? And if you turn to page 25, you should see a signature.
Yep,
Is that your signature?
it is.
And are the contents of that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are, yes.
Thank you. The URN for that, the document needn't be displayed, is WITN 08200100, and a copy of it will be uploaded to the inquiry's website. I'm therefore not going to ask you questions about everything that's in it, just selected parts of it. Can I start, please, with your professional background? You joined the post office in January 1986, is that right?
Yes,
And you left the post office in 2007
yes.
when you joined Royal Mail Marketing, is that right?
Yes,
A job that you in turn left in 2017.
I had 6 jobs in marketing, but yes, I left the business in 17.
If you could just come forwards a little bit and make sure you keep your voice up so that the microphone picks up everything you say, please, Mr. Utting. So in terms of the period between 1986 and 2007, if we just break that down, I think you started working on the counters, is that right?
That's right, yes.
In post offices.
Yes,
In 1990, you joined the investigations team, is that right?
yes. I had a short period in personnel when I first came off the counters, and then I joined the investigations team.
And that was initially, you say in your witness statement, as a postal officer. What was a postal officer in the investigations team?
So a postal officer was the same grade as I was when I was on the counter. My role in the investigation team was really to collate loss reports. So we used to get every loss claim down from customer services, and we used to put them onto a spreadsheet software package called Rapid File. And then at the end of every month, we used to produce a monthly report. So this was all Royal Mail, and it was basically to look at where certain types of mail were going missing across the district I worked at.
And then eventually you became an investigation manager, is that right?
I was acting investigation. I was on temporary promotion from about mid-90 to beginning of 92, I think it was. And then I joined POID.
And you joined POID, the Post Office Investigation Department, in 1993, is that right?
I think it was 92, I'm not sure.
Okay, in your statement it says 93, but I won't quibble with you over that.
Right.
In 95 or 96, you joined Royal Mail Security as a security and investigations manager, is that right?
Yeah, it was the same job, but POID was being disbanded. So instead of working for the corporate centre where we'd been, we just merged into the business unit we were working at the time.
In 1999, you moved to the post office as an investigation manager, is that right?
Yes,
In 2001, you were appointed an investigation team leader.
yes.
And at some point thereafter, I don't think you can remember the precise date or even year, you became policy and standards manager.
Yeah, when I became a team leader, I went off on a project for a year to develop the post office card account. And when I came back shortly afterwards, I became policy and standards manager, but I'm not entirely sure when.
So that would make it about 2002, would that be right?
It was probably middle of 2002.
Then in 2004, you became the National Internal Crime and Investigations Manager.
Yes.
And you stayed in that role until you moved over to Royal Mail in 2007, albeit in early 2007, you took charge of what was called the commercial security and mails integrity element of the role. Is that right?
So that was always part of my role when I was National Investigations Manager. When John Scott took over as corporate as head of security, he split the role, and I got given the commercial security and mails integrity part, and stopped doing anything to do with investigations.
And so from that time, early 2007 onwards, you weren't concerned with the investigation of the type of alleged crime that we're concerned with in this inquiry. Is that right?
I wasn't concerned with the investigation of any crime. I was removed completely from that area of the business.
From early 2007?
Yeah.
Okay. And so looking at the period from 1999 onwards, when you moved to the post office as an investigation manager until early 2007, which is that really our relevant period for you, did you conduct any investigations yourself?
Yes.
And how many investigations would you yourself conduct a year, for example?
When I first started, obviously when I joined post office, we still paid benefits via penny benefit books and green jar checks, and there was quite a lot of fraud in that space, and I probably investigated 7 or 8 cases a year of that nature. And then with audit shortages, we would only get involved if we were called, because somebody went to a post office and the auditors found something. We had things like pension overstatements, gyro suppressions. I would imagine I probably dealt with, because it was always fluid, so you had cases at different stages of maturity. On any one time, I probably had 10 to 15 cases on the books.
And you were described from 2004 onwards as the National Internal Crime and Investigations Manager. Did you manage a team?
The whole team.
And how many people were in the team?
I think when I started, we had 65, and when we did the last reorganisation, I think it was down to about 45.
And why was there a reduction?
Cost.
And did that have an impact on the number of investigations you were able to carry out?
Oh yeah. We changed the trigger points upwards. I told the business what we would be doing and why we wouldn't be able to sustain the effort that we put in previously. Obviously, less people means less capacity, and therefore we raised the trigger points and set up less cases. We also had to bear in mind that with the removal of pension books and gyro checks, the fraud on the counter was going to change considerably, and pension allowance fraud cases took an awful lot of time, and generally ended up with trials at Crown Court. And with those going, it was like a balancing act between how much work was going to drop off to how much resource we could remove.
You mentioned a couple of times there trigger points. Could you explain to the chairman what a trigger point is?
So when I was Policy and Standards Manager, we wrote a document that basically listed all of the types of crime or loss that could occur at a branch, and we set, based on the seriousness of what it was, we would set a trigger point to the monetary value that we would get involved with. So we didn't set trigger points on anything really other than the amount of the loss, because obviously we cost money to use, and therefore we would set a trigger point based on the nature of the crime and the value of loss as to whether we would get involved or not.
So for alleged crime X, investigations department won't investigate unless the value of the alleged loss is Y or above Y.
Yeah.
Which might be £10,000, £20,000.
Yeah, if it was a branch office and it was a single counter till and somebody had a £500 loss that was completely unexplainable, then we might go straight out and do what we called an open inquiry, which was basically go to the office, interview people, see what you could establish, and then go away again. If it was something like an audit shortage, the triggers were much higher because the business had its own processes in place in relation to sub-postmasters contracts, that unless it was...
Sorry, if you can just slow down a little bit, please. I'm getting the thumbs up from the transcriber there. You speak very quickly, and I've asked you a series of relatively open questions, and you've given us very full answers, which I'm grateful. But if you slow down a little bit, because everything you say has to be typed up as you say it.
That's fine.
So just going back to the trigger points, you said that with the reduction in numbers of staff from 65 roughly at the beginning until 45 roughly at the end of your period of tenure, that caused you to raise the trigger points. Is that right?
Yes.
And can you give us a general impression for this period, say end 99 until early 2007? You were an investigator and a manager of investigators.
Yes.
What was it like working within the post office in that period?
So the investigation team was quite detached from the business, because obviously the nature of what we didn't always make us popular with people. So we were always seen as they used to describe us as a necessary evil on occasion.
Just slow it down again.
Sorry.
And who would describe you? Who's the they in that sentence?
So
the necessary evil.
So the senior people that we discuss things with, people like the Federation of Sub Postmasters. We used to meet with Colin Baker and a guy called John and a lady, and I can't remember her name, periodically, and they all understood what we did and why we were necessary, but that didn't make us popular. And in the wider business, obviously, a lot of people in post office, in the administration functions, had previously worked on the counter, and the ID, as we were called when you're on the counter, are those nasty people that come and give you a hard time if you have a loss. So we weren't loved by everybody. But from the post office perspective, the business was becoming much less of the old style post office as I knew when I was on the counter, and much more of a finance orientated organisation. Can
you expand on that, what you mean?
It just, obviously the post office was losing money. And obviously I'm probably not qualified to I was the investigation manager, but the post office was becoming much more cost conscious. So at every opportunity, if they could take out cost, then they would do so. And there was also a drive to be much more formal in relation to postmaster contracts and recovering losses and that sort of thing. It became a much less friendly organisation where everyone felt part of a family, and much more a quite stern business, and it was much more contract related. We used to have quite a difficult time with Fujitsu around Horizon, and they used to always create the contract and the commercials, and if we wanted the business to do anything, then it's always about how much it was going to cost to do and everything else, and that wasn't always the case previously. And there's good reasons for doing things that way, but it just meant that the post office changed.
And what did that change in this period? What effect did that have on the nature of the work that you were undertaking in investigations?
It didn't have a massive effect, other than the fact that when I took over, we had a certain number of cases on hand amongst the investigators, and obviously with the amount of resource reducing...
Just slow down, mate.
Sorry. With the amount of resource we had being cut, I set a drive in place and said all of the old cases that we've got need to be closed. And I got quite strict with the investigators and told them that every case had to be shut that was over 6 months old, unless there was a good reason not to, which made me even less popular with the investigators. But ultimately, if you're managing to cost, there's only so much you can do. And the investigators had massive workloads, and we needed to make sure that it wasn't ridiculously so.
This drive, I think you did, amongst the things you said, included a drive to not only cut cost in the expenditure of resource on investigations, but also in the recovery of money from sub-postmasters.
I don't think it was just sub-postmasters. It was any loss that the business incurred, they were becoming much more inclined to pursue it. We introduced financial investigations under my control, and part of that was to aid our ability to recover monies more quickly when criminal offences had been committed.
When were financial investigations instituted? I mean, in what year rather than in what
It was
circumstances?
either very late 2004 or 2005. We were talking about it at the time that Phil Gerrish left and I took over, but it actually kicked off while I was in charge.
And was that to carry into effect the desire from senior management to recover as much money as was possible from sub-postmasters?
I don't think it was so much a drive from senior management. I think it was instigated by us on the basis that the police were doing it, the DWP, who we work very closely in relation to pension frauds, were doing it. And when we'd worked with the DWP, we'd met a police financial investigator, and he'd pretty much offered up, if the post office was prepared to pay the salary, the police would give us an embedded financial investigator. Because we were more, the post office was were not minded to recruit from external sources at that stage because they were trying to cut resource. So we spoke to them and we said, well, what about if we train our own? And we spoke to the Assets Recovery Agency and they said, yeah, we can train them. And I think the DWP went the same way. So we employed, well, we didn't employ financial, we trained some of our own investigators to become financial investigators.
And were the majority of the investigators in the ID, like you, former counter staff?
We had a mixture. So we had guys that were ex-police, we had guys that were ex-forces, we had people that had come in from outside the business. I would say the people we recruited more latterly tended to be post office because the post office didn't want to recruit externally at the same time they were making people redundant internally. So I think more latterly it was mostly internal while I was there. I think after I'd left it changed again.
Thank you. Can we turn to the next topic, please, which is the production of post office policies concerning investigations and prosecutions. So this is focusing on the time in particular when you were policies and standards manager. That's from 2002, we've established, I think, until 2004. And what was the nature of your role as policy and standards manager?
So it was twofold. One was looking at the internal policies of post office and how they related to the role that we had, and the other one was looking at the security and investigation policies that came from security and investigation services and being the business lead in Post Office Limited to make sure that they worked for us and that we abided by what was being set by them.
Was it a policy writing function, or did part of your role include ensuring compliance with policy?
It was more of a writing and management. The policies were distributed amongst all of the investigation teams, and it was the responsibility of the team leaders and the operations lead to ensure the policies were being complied with. So I was almost the person that wrote the stuff. I wasn't the guy that managed it and policed it within the business.
Thank you. Can we look at some examples, please? These will come up on the screen for you. And start, please, with poll 303 9960. We can see the title of the policy, Investigation and Prosecution Policy. And if we scroll to the foot of the page, if we just keep going, we can see that it's dated February 2003, and therefore is in the relevant period that we're looking at, some point in 2002 until 2004. And if we can turn to the second page, please. And scroll down, please. We can see that the author is said to be the Law and Legislation Programme Manager.
Yeah.
Can you remember who that was and where they sat in the business?
I'm not 100%. I think that was actually John Messenger, who is the final review.
The final reviewer at the bottom of the page.
Yeah,
okay.
it may be him, it may be somebody who worked under him. John was the person that I liaised with around these policies at that time.
And in which department did John work?
He worked for Security and Investigation Services, so he was part of Andrew Wilson's central security team.
And we can see that under assurance details, your name appears.
Yes.
Can you tell us what does the title assurance or the appearance of you as having given assurance for a document or a policy like this mean?
It would mean that I'd read it, ensured that it was suitable for us in Post Office Limited, and then I would sign it off on behalf of Tony Marsh to say that this policy would apply to our investigations.
And how would you carry out that role or discharge that responsibility?
So I was really just looking at the policy to ensure that it was still current. A lot of these policies, they weren't written on the spot. They were probably reiterations of older policies, and they were just being updated every year. So I would read through them, make sure they were still current and applicable in Post Office Limited, sign them off. And then there would either be a circular from corporate security, or if they didn't send a circular, we would send a circular out to our investigators to update them on what the policy now said.
If we go back to page 1, please, we can see the purpose of the policy set out at the top. The aim of this policy is to set out the criteria against which we investigate crimes and suspect crimes committed against our business, and also define when actions proceed under criminal law. And then scrolling down, introduction, our business and reputation depends on the integrity of its employees and procedures, etc. Reporting offences, crimes or suspect crimes against the following must be reported to corporate security or the appropriate business security and investigation unit. Can you explain what the difference between corporate security and appropriate business security and investigation unit is, please?
So corporate security was the part of the corporate centre of the business at the time. So Royal Mail, I think it was Royal Mail Group then, or it might have been Royal Mail Holdings, I can't remember, but it was made up of a corporate centre, which was the core part of the headquarters function, and then below that were all of the different business units. So we had Royal Mail International, Royal Mail, Parcel Force, Post Office Limited, and I think it was, I can't remember what they were called now, Romec, but they may have gone by then. That was the engineering function. And each of those business units had their own security function. But corporate security has sort of a dotted line management responsibility, so they set policy and the business unit signed it off and abided by it. And
so, to be clear, this is a policy issued by the centre, is that right?
Yes, if John Messenger's name's on it, probably yes.
But it applied to Post Office.
Oh, yes, yes.
And that's why we see your assurance details on it.
Yes.
So, crimes or suspect crimes against the following must be reported or in liaison with the police. And then they're listed. Each case 3.3 will be dealt with on merit, and action taken will be in accordance with the disciplinary code of the business. Where evidence of crime committed by an employee of Royal Mail Group, including Post Office Limited, against Royal Mail Group, including Post Office Limited or its customer, is established, the offending employee may also be dealt with in accordance with the criminal law. Prosecution guidelines of the business will be used in making any decision to proceed under criminal law in consultation with legal services. What does this actually tell us?
It just tells you that everybody in the post office is subject to the disciplinary procedures, but if a suspect crime is considered, then the investigation team may be involved.
The purpose of the policy was to set out criteria against which crimes and suspected crimes would be investigated. It doesn't really do that, does it?
I've read this policy when it was sent to me. I did this 20 years ago.
Yeah.
At the time, I would probably have read it and said, "Yep, that'll do." Reading it now, I can't 100% say I understand what it says, but I think basically what it's saying that this is a security policy, so the only people that would see this would be people within the security team, and basically it's telling them that if there is a crime suspected, then the investigation team may become involved and look into it. What it doesn't say is that if the investigation team became involved, usually the disciplinary would go on hold until we'd conducted our preliminary inquiries.
I mean, it doesn't really set out criteria in which...
No, it doesn't give the sorts of criteria we discussed earlier, like the triggers that where we would get involved.
That can come down, thank you. In your witness statement, there's no need to turn it up at the moment. But in fact, we better. Page 7 of your witness statement, please. It'll come up on the screen for you. So WITN 08200100. Page 7 and paragraph 17. You say, I've been asked to describe what the process was for dealing with complaints regarding the conduct of an investigation by the security team. I have no recollection of any formal process, but can say that all security team managers and staff were subject to the same disciplinary procedures as other members of post office staff, save that where any serious allegations were made, these could be referred to the corporate security team, who would undertake an independent investigation of what went on outside of the line. These investigations would normally be undertaken where there was an allegation of serious misconduct or a suspicion of criminality. There was also a team of harassment investigators who would investigate allegations of bullying and harassment from across the Royal Mail Group, and investigators could also be investigated via that route. Can you help us? Can you recall of any instances in this sort of 7-year period that we're looking at, 6 or 7 year period, where an investigation was commenced into a complaint regarding the conduct of a POID or ID investigator?
Yes.
And what, without giving the details of the exact, the names or similar, what kind of complaints were made and investigated?
Without giving details, it's very difficult to describe.
Go ahead.
So we had an allegation about a group of Royal Mail investigators who were sexually harassing a member of the team. I was involved in that investigation. Then there's an allegation of a senior manager in corporate security behaving improperly at an out-of-work function. I was involved in that investigation. As a result of the first investigation, I was investigated for harassment. No, that was the second one. The first one, I was investigated for, I think that was probably described as harassment as well. So we were investigating our own investigators. Well, they weren't ours, they were another group's investigators. And as a result of both those investigations, I ended up the subject of an investigation myself. So there were periodically instances of people within the security team being investigated for different things, but it was always done outside of the team they were in.
And this investigation of the investigators, did that ever concern the quality and nature of the work that they were undertaking, rather than the kind of things that you've just mentioned, which seem to be different species of alleged misconduct?
I think there were reviews of cases. it was a long time ago, and I can't remember specifics. I believe if we had a case, and I think there was an example of a case that we lost at court or was thrown out because of a breach of pace, and I can't remember details, and I think that was investigated. And the right people to look at that were legal services and corporate security, because they were the people in the business that had the expertise necessary to look at what went wrong and why.
Thank you. That document can come down. And so investigations might arise from the way in which a case was disposed of at court.
Yes.
Was there any form of systemic review of the outcomes of cases that, putting it colloquially, went against the post office in court?
I think, again, it's a long time ago. I think when we lost a case, there would be a report written by counsel to describe what happened and why they thought there'd been a problem.
And to whom would that be sent?
It would be sent usually to criminal law, and I think criminal law would probably have shared it with the leadership team of the business concerned.
And the leadership team, can you be a bit more precise in the case of post office?
In the case of post office, it would have been probably Phil Garish before me, and me if there'd been one while I was there. I don't remember seeing one when I was there. But I might have done, I don't know.
And can you help us? I mean, it might be difficult if you don't remember one in your tenure. What was the nature of the review undertaken? So it was written up by counsel, passed to the solicitors, and then what?
If there was a remedial training requirement for whoever the investigator might have been, then that would have been looked at. If the investigator had done something wrong, it probably would have been looked into separately. To be honest, I can't fully remember exactly how things would have worked, but it wouldn't have just been, oh yeah, we failed, here's the report, put it in the drawer. Someone would have looked at it to find out if there were lessons to be learned.
Okay. Can we move on, please, to look at the management of casework management? You tell us in your statement, this needn't be turned up, in paragraphs 9 and 10 on page 5 and on paragraph 31 on page 12, that you have no recollection of a document that you were shown called Casework Management, dated October 2002. I just want to go and look at that document, if we may, please. It's Poll 0010 4777. And again, if we look at the foot of the page, we'll see first, Casework Management England and Wales is its title. And if we look at the foot of the page, we'll see the date as October 2002. We see from the top of page 1 the purpose of the document. The aim of this policy is to ensure that adequate controls are in place to maintain standards throughout investigation processes. And this is a 6-page document. If we look, please, at page 2 and scroll down a little bit, please. That bullet point, third from the bottom, the issue of dealing with information concerning procedural failures is a difficult one. Some major procedural weaknesses, if they become public knowledge, may have an adverse effect on our business. They may assist others to commit offences against our business, undermine a prosecution case, bring our business into disrepute, or harm relations with major customers, unless the offender states that he is aware that accounting weaknesses exist and that he took advantage of them. It is important not to volunteer that option to the offender during interview. The usual duties of disclosure under the Criminal Procedure and Investigations Act 1996 still apply. So this policy from 2002 appears to contemplate, firstly, that procedural weaknesses may exist, that if they became public knowledge, they might undermine a prosecution case, and that they shouldn't be mentioned in an interview unless the suspect states that they're aware of them. Can you explain what major procedural weaknesses might be referring to?
I think there'd be a few things. So this is 2002, and at that point we're still paying benefits using books and gyro checks. And when pensions were paid at post offices using books, there were a large number of foils at the end of the week to be calculated and sent off. When the foils got to Lisahally in Northern Ireland, they were sample checked. So if you had, if you were doing a case in relation to pension fraud, you wouldn't want to mention in an interview that they only sample checked the calculation of the pension fraud payments at the end of the week, because if that gets out into the wider post office, it might encourage other people to go and do the same, because the sample check at Lisahally, bearing in mind how many post offices we had and the amount of staff they had, wasn't a regular occurrence. So when they identified an issue, they would have to then back check that office for a number of months to find out if it was a one-off or something more serious. So we would never say in an interview to somebody that sort of process happened, because you don't want people to start thinking they can take chances, or people to know that not everything was 100% checked under that system. I think when we had Horizon, that became probably less of an issue, because the Horizon data calculated everything for you. There were still ways of inflating your pensions, because obviously you could put something into Horizon and the foil wouldn't be there, but the report would say it was. So Lisahally, when they checked, would find that foil was missing, and tell us that there were foils missing, and therefore we could start an investigation. But that's the sort of procedure I think that sort of things are implying. But you have to bear in mind, this is a corporate security policy, so it's quite broad, because it would apply in Royal Mail and Parcel Force as well. So saying things like not the cameras that are in the sorting office watching for people stealing aren't always switched on or aren't always being monitored is not something that you would say to someone in an interview. So I think that's implying that sort of thing.
It's very general, isn't it?
Royal Mail is a very big organisation, so writing a distinct policy for an individual business unit would probably have been a little bit tighter than that.
Is it reflecting a policy and culture to hide procedural weaknesses?
I would say no, because the last sentence tells you that at the point that we're going to prosecute somebody, the Criminal Procedures and Investigations Act still applies, and under that Act we would be duty-bound to disclose anything anyway.
Is it reflective of a policy to avoid issues becoming public because they may harm the reputation of the post office?
Potentially. I'm not. I think potentially that could be argued. Yes.
That can come down. Thank you. Can we turn, please, to poll 0004 8361? This is an investigation team report, and it's dated, we can see on the right-hand side there, December 2006. So we've moved on a bit here to the period when you were national manager. Can you see that?
Yes.
You can see at the top, and it appears on every page, it says Post Office Limited Investigation Team Monthly Report. And as it says there on the tin, was this a report that was prepared every month?
Yes.
And what was the purpose of the preparation of an investigation team monthly report?
It was something that was instigated, I think it was when I worked with Rod Ismay. Alan Cook and, well, Peter Corbett, I think, wanted there to be more visibility of what we were doing and how we were doing it.
Breaking that down, Peter Corbett was...
He was a finance director. He was one step above my line manager, Rod Ismay.
And so when were these introduced?
I would say end of 2004, maybe a bit later. I can't remember. I think I wrote about 12, 13 of them. But I was on holiday one month and Dave Pardo did it instead.
And did they continue to be written until you moved on in 2007?
So when I stopped having involvement in the investigation team at the early part of 2007, I don't know if they were continued. I think they may have been, but I don't know. I had no involvement with investigations.
So you said that Mr. Corbett, as finance director,
Yeah.
who was the line manager, the boss of Rod Ismay,
Yeah,
who was your line manager,
yeah.
wanted greater visibility of what the investigation team was doing.
Yes. I think that's how it started, yes.
And visibility to whom?
To the Poly T, basically.
To the...
The Poly T, that's the executive team in Post Office Limited.
And can you explain your understanding of what the executive team consisted of?
It was pretty much the Post Office Limited board. So Alan Cook, before him it was David Mills, after him it was Paula Venables, and then there was Dave Miller, the commercial director who was George somebody, HR director Debbie somebody, obviously Peter Corbett, and I think there were a couple of others, but I can't remember who they were.
And do you know why it was thought that it was necessary for the highest level within the organisation to have greater visibility on what the investigation team was doing?
I can't recall exactly. I think when I first met Peter Corbett, when I started working for Rod, I think Peter Corbett was a little bit surprised at who we were and what we did, and it may have been that he just wanted more people across the top of the business to know that we were there, rather than anything else. Because, like I said earlier on, the post office investigation team we were in a corner somewhere, and we lived in dark places, and no one paid much attention to us other than when something went wrong.
You'll see who this report is addressed to. So it's addressed to the Pole executive team, the Pole ET. Yeah. You've just listed in broad terms who that consisted of. To the Director Security Corporate.
That's Andrew Wilson.
And so that's back in Royal Mail?
That's in Royal Mail Corporate, yeah.
Head of Corporate Investigations Corporate. That's back in Royal Mail?
That's back in Royal Mail, that's Phil Gerrish.
Head of Criminal Law?
That's Rob Wilson.
That's in Post Office?
No, Rob Wilson was in Royal Mail.
By this time, December 06, yes?
Yeah, Post Office Limited. All the time I worked in Post Office Limited, we didn't have our own criminal law team.
Head of Security, Post Office Limited?
That was Tony Marsh.
And was that a fairly constant distribution list?
It was a permanent distribution list. We didn't send it to anyone else.
And in general terms, we'll look at this report that we've got with us. In general terms, what was the content of the monthly reports?
It was just a monthly update on what we were doing, where we were with things, anything major that had come up that we were dealing with that we thought they needed to know about, any problems or issues that we were having, just so that they knew what we were doing, and if there were issues we needed support, this was a good way of alerting people that we were coming banging on the door for things.
Did you ever receive any response from the Post Office executive team in relation to these monthly reports that you were writing? Did anything come back down?
I believe I got emails from Alan Cook occasionally saying thank you. I had communications with Dave Miller reasonably regularly, and I think he found it useful. When he left, I think Alan Cook sent an email to Paula Venables to say this is a useful report. You should pay attention to it.
Why?
He didn't say anything further than that because he copied me into the email. And I would occasionally have conversations with Phil Gerrish about stuff, because he'd been in my role before me and I used him as a bit of a sounding board for things.
And so this was a means of communicating to the Post Office executive team the activities of the investigation team in the previous month, so that the executive of the Post Office could be in no doubt what Post Office investigators were up to, what their work was in that previous month.
Yeah, it had an element of an ongoing performance report, because obviously we would give updates on things we were already doing, and general performance measures about how many cases we had, how much money we were investigating and stuff like that.
And so trends were set out.
Yes.
And forecasts were made.
I believe so, yes.
And so the executive team could see from that, by both a collection of the reports, but also within each report where a trend in the investigation of crime or a forecast of the investigation of crime was made, the big picture.
Yes.
Can we look, please, at this one? This one states, the principal aims of the investigation team are to stop criminal offences taking place, apprehend and prosecute those who commit offences against us in order to maximise our recovery and reduce loss to the Post Office and its clients through the identification of areas of weakness throughout the business, both operationally and within our product offerings. Was that a standard sort of template
I think that
at the
was
top of each
the header
report?
of every one, yes.
And was the role of the investigation team, therefore, preventative in nature?
It was combined preventative and investigative.
And how did the preventative element of the investigation team manifest itself in practice?
So we would look at procedures and identify areas of weakness where fraud or theft could potentially occur, and try to help with processes. That was done in conjunction with the security team and the audit team, and they usually led on those things. But if we did an investigation and found something that was wrong, then we would highlight it in order that it could be addressed. On the product side, we would look at what was being sold and how it was being processed, to see if there were opportunities for people to abuse the process. We had issues with a number of products, and particularly with some promotions that we did that facilitated people taking advantage.
In time, across the period that we're looking at, was it the case, however, that far more emphasis was placed on debt recovery through the civil and criminal courts rather than preventative action?
I don't think so. I think they were always both dealt with. I think from the perspective of my team was primarily focused on the investigation side, with conducting investigations to find out what went wrong and who perpetrated it, if there was a crime. But as part of that, we would also feed back to the business any weaknesses that we observed that needed to be addressed.
Can we look at the headlines, if we scroll down, please, at 1.0? And in this report, you give them an executive summary at the beginning, is that right?
That's right, yes.
One, major process weaknesses identified in respect of postal order cashback, offer for home insurance, etc.
Yes.
Investigations raised in 2 frauds against IASA.
I haven't got a clue what that is.
No, 3 internal contact centre fraud at EDS Preston.
Yes.
Travel card product still causing concerns.
Yes.
5, Rugby case finalised, postmaster pleaded guilty.
So that's Rugeley.
Oh, Rugeley, my mistake. And 6, identity fraud issues continue to be raised, and police and the Serious and Organised Crime Agency are showing an interest in both check and send and redirection frauds being perpetrated at post office branches. So is the idea of this a means of communicating the headlines to your executive team?
Yes.
Can we look, please, at page 2, please? and scroll down to the foot of the page. I'm going to skip over the details that we've just seen summarised in your executive summary to the executive, and look at paragraph 2.0, investigation operations. This seems to be in grey shaded or bold. Is that because it was important, or just to differentiate it from the rest?
I think it was just to explain that that was the header.
I meant that you can see that the whole box is grey shaded.
Oh, I think that's because we did. This is like a period update, so we did this every month so that they could see it, and it just means that this is our performance on a monthly basis. The rest of it was, these are the items that need to be read.
I see. This month's recovery figure is £63,000. Period 9 case raise figures for deficiencies at audit alone were £140,000. In total, 31 new investigation cases were raised during the period, with a current loss value of £245,000. At present, the team is dealing with 248 ongoing investigations, with a loss value in excess of £9 million. Of these, 80 are currently going through the courts. Post Office OD caseloads. What's Post Office OD?
I really don't know. I can't remember.
In any event, they have been managed down and are now at a sustainable level, though the team continues to work at capacity and some inquiries are inevitably lapsed before any value can be added. There has been and will continue to be a fall in prosecutions achieved, and this will eventually impact on recovery figures. A review of criteria used to instigate inquiries is about to commence. This will see a reduction in the number of cases raised to investigation status. Is that a cross-reference to the upping of the trigger?
Yeah, it does, and the first part of it reflects on the drive that we had to reduce caseloads. I think when I took over, there was something like 600 cases ongoing, and a lot of them were old and stale and weren't going anywhere. So the first thing we did was close them down, the ones that weren't going to go anywhere, in order that we had more manageable workloads across the team.
New key performance indicators are also currently being developed that will show how the team continues to add real value to Post Office Limited. So overall, the executive, is this right, would know month on month how much money had been recovered by the work of the investigation team?
Yes.
That amount is identified as deficient at audit as well, yes?
Yes. So the figure that we produce there is across all investigation cases, and at this time, audit shortages were probably becoming more of a regular, but it would include all of the other fraud type cases that we had, and because of the length of time it takes to get into prosecution and then do recoveries, some of that money would still have been from pension cases.
And as you've told us already, you could apply levers to decide how many investigations would be commenced?
We would. We wouldn't be doing that on a monthly basis. That would be probably a yearly review.
And would the executive have to sign off that change in trigger points?
I'm not sure the executive would, but when we did it, I told Rod Ismay, I think Rod Ismay and Peter Corbett were aware of what we were doing and agreed. I mean, ultimately, it doesn't really matter if they sign it off or they don't, because you get a choice of you do a fewer number of cases but do them well, or you have a vast number of cases and they sit on the books because no one gets to deal with them.
And so would you agree that through this kind of reporting, there was a formal and established mechanism for the communication of information as to the work of the investigation department to the executive?
Yes.
Did you ever attend any meetings with the executive or any of the other people, the collection of people to whom this was addressed, to speak to these reports?
No.
And so what formally came back then? You were firing this stuff in, which we can see is in part to justify the team. It says these KPIs will show how the team continues to add real value to Post Office Limited. So it's important to put a marker down, presumably, as to the continuing value and therefore existence of the team.
Yes, yeah, I think that's one of the primary reasons for us, from our side, doing it, was to let them know that we weren't just people that sat in dark rooms and didn't do anything. But what came back was Alan Cook thanked me, Dave Miller, when I saw him, said, I've seen your report, it's good. Occasionally, a particular subject would come back from somebody. I know in the case of the travel money card, there was quite a disagreement between me and the commercial team about the travel money card and how it was run. And that came back, well, that later came back via John Scott as well. But yeah, it was basically, we were telling them what we were doing, and by and large, they said, thanks very much.
So nothing of substance came back?
Only if there was an issue in relation to a particular product and somebody came and asked questions about why are you saying this, and then we would give our view as to why we were saying it and what should be done about it.
Thank you. That document can come down. We've heard some evidence from a lady called Teresa Williamson that after she left the criminal law team in 2003, there was a restructuring of reporting lines so that the criminal law team no longer reported to the head of legal services, but instead reported to the head of security and operations. Do you remember that?
I think that when the head of criminal law stopped reporting to the head of legal services, he actually reported to Andrew Wilson. So that's not security and operations, that's the corporate security director. I think that's what happened. I don't know.
So you think that evidence we've heard might be wrong?
Possibly, yes.
If it's the case that criminal law reported to head of security, would you see a problem or a conflict arising there?
I don't know. I mean, I can see that some people might look at it and say, so the business is now controlling the lawyer, but I don't think it worked that way. The criminal law team was still seen as the independent legal experts. Andrew Wilson wouldn't, and I know him, he wouldn't have dreamed of telling Rob Wilson how to manage a legal case. I think it was more of an accommodation rather than to take control.
What do you mean an accommodation?
So the legal services, the criminal law team needed to be report somewhere, and I think at the time somebody in some project somewhere probably decided that if they're dealing with criminal law, why don't we stick with the security manager? But I don't know, and I'm speculating.
The monthly reports that we've seen, if systemic problems or repeated problems with Horizon had existed, of which the investigation department became aware, that would be an appropriate medium, an ideal medium, to communicate those problems to the executive team, wouldn't it?
Oh yes, if we'd seen a large number of cases where doubt was being cast upon Horizon, then it would probably have gone into that report quite quickly.
Can you remember that ever occurring?
Not while I was in charge, no.
And just to be clear on that, you don't remember that occurring because systemic or repeated problems with Horizon were not brought to your attention, and that's why they weren't included within the report?
Yeah, all the time I worked in investigations, there was no indication to us that there was any sort of systemic problem with the Horizon system.
And did that occur, was that the position right up until your function changed in early 2007?
Yes, I believe so. We had obviously cases where people said there were problems with Horizon. From my recollection, they were very few, and usually the evidence that we had suggested that Horizon wasn't the problem.
You tell us in your witness statement, it's paragraph 8, that in your operational investigation roles, you would be responsible for providing a disciplinary report relating to the cases that you investigated, where a suspect was identified, investigated, and for ensuring that these were completed where required by investigators under your direct supervision. Yes?
Yes.
Was that when you were looking at cases investigated under your supervision, the report, your principal window into what had gone on in the case?
No, I think the suspect offender report would be the one. So when they conducted a case, and it's hard to, because I know something changed, but when I was an investigator, we used to write 2 reports. We'd have a suspect offender report which went in the case file, and there would be a discipline report that went to the discipline manager within the business. And when I was the prosecution authority, I would be reading the case file report, not the discipline report. So I would be reading the full report that had everything in it.
You refer there to the case file report. Is that the same report as a suspect offender or offender report?
Yes, because that's the case file was like the core document in an investigation, and the case file came first into the casework team, and then the physical case file would go to legal services. Their advice would be inserted into the case file, then it would come back to me for prosecution authority. I think later on they started doing things electronically, but I think when I was there, we were still passing electronic case files.
In your witness statement, you refer to your involvement in a case against Mr. Thomas, Hughie Thomas.
Yes.
That's paragraphs 47 and 48 of your witness statement. I just want to look at some documents arising from that. FUJ 0015 5181. Can you help us, please, with what this document is? If we just pan out a little bit, please. Do you recognise the nature of the document?
I'm not sure exactly, because I didn't do these documents, but it looks to me like Graham's asking somebody to do some analysis on some call logs in relation to, I'm presuming, Mr. Thomas' allegation that there's a fault with nil transactions on card account, I think.
So first of all, who was Graham Ward?
Graham Ward was the casework manager in the investigation team.
So was he managed by you?
Yes.
And how many people did he manage?
5, I think.
And for the entirety of the period that we're looking at, were you Graham Ward's manager?
No. So we had a lot of reorganisations and I changed roles a few times. Graham started to work for me, I believe, when I took over as National Investigation Manager. So prior to that, the casework manager, who I believe then was Brian Sharkey, would have reported to Phil Gerrish. But we did a reorganisation soon after I took over, and Graham became the casework manager.
In any event, for this audit record query, ARQ, Mr. Ward has asked, in Mr. Thomas's case, please conduct an analysis of all help desk calls for the above period.
Yes.
And the period is the 14th of September 2005 until the 13th of October 2005.
Yes.
Also, please conduct a thorough examination of the system in general with a view to refuting the postmaster's allegation that there is a fault with the nil transactions on card, account, online banking transactions. Please bear in mind we're investigating a substantial shortage in the accounts, and should this proceed to prosecution, we may be asking for a supporting witness statement. And so this ARQ request, as I'm going to call it, were you familiar with these?
I knew they happened. I wouldn't say I was familiar with how it worked, but I knew they happened, and I knew they were a requirement where we needed data for Horizon.
The request was conduct a thorough examination of the system with a view to refuting the postmaster's allegation there's a fault. Yes? Would you see requests like this?
No.
Presumably, if you were writing it, you would write it in a more open way.
That doesn't look very scientific, does it?
Well, it looks loaded, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Is that reflective of an attitude of mind that was common amongst investigators at the time? We need to disprove what a postmaster is saying to us, rather than openly to investigate the accuracy or reliability of what a postmaster is saying to us.
It looks like that on paper, but I don't think that was the mental state of us in the investigations. I think it's probably poorly worded, but it's not. I don't think that reflects where we were as a team.
Okay, that can come down, thank you. You tell us in your witness statement, it's paragraphs 20, 21 and 22, of the involvement of investigators following the identification of shortages at audits. And you tell us in paragraph 22, again, no need for this to be turned up, quote, an investigator would take steps to secure all necessary documentation and other evidence at the branch. They would then gather any further evidence they required, interview suspects and witnesses, and analyse the documentation and reports from Horizon in order to establish the cause of the loss. What does all the necessary documentation and evidence mean?
It would depend on the case, but they would, within the office, the audit team would be asked to produce all the reports Horizon had for the branch. The way Horizon worked is, I think it was possibly 29 days or maybe a bit longer after branch trading was introduced. We could produce all the transactions direct from the terminal in the office. So rather than us have to rely on ARQ, which was a limited resource, we would print all the reports we could from the Horizon terminal in the office so that they could be analysed manually to see if there was anything in there that pointed to a solution to why the loss occurred. There would also be any paper documentation. There were occasions where people would have an envelope or a bag somewhere where they were putting money. So we would not necessarily always take it, but make a note that it was there so that we could establish what the purpose of it was later on. If we went into an office and the investigators, when they searched the office, found documentation that had been suppressed, then that documentation would have been seized. So anything that was in there, it all depended on what the case was, because audit shortages on the face of it all look the same, but when you get to the office, they might be very different.
In audit shortage cases, as you've described them, and by an audit shortage case, you mean where an auditor or auditors have attended, they've conducted a stock take, and there's a material difference between what the system records as being present or should be present
Yes.
in the branch by way of cash and stock, and that which is actually present in the branch by way of cash and stock. In what circumstances would investigators identify whether further evidence from the post office or Fujitsu was required about Horizon?
Again, it would depend on the case. If the sub postmaster or the counter clerk had given an indication of when a loss actually happened, I would expect to look at the Horizon data for that period to see if there's anything in there that would facilitate the loss. It would all depend on the case and the nature of how the loss occurred if we could establish that, and whether Horizon data was going to give us an inkling.
Was throughout the period of your tenure an assumption made that the data produced by Horizon was reliable and robust?
Yes.
And given that assumption or that belief, would that have had an effect on the assessment of when and in what circumstances it was necessary to obtain ARQ data?
I expect so. I don't know. I would imagine that if there was something that had been indicated to us that suggested that we should look at Horizon, we would look at Horizon. I think because we worked in a world where Horizon was 100% infallible, then we would work on the basis that the loss didn't occur because of Horizon. So you're not going to see anything in Horizon if Horizon hasn't done anything.
So putting it another way, you didn't think you needed to prove the reliability of Horizon by obtaining underlying data. You took the figures produced by Horizon as being accurate and reliable.
Yes.
And was that a common mindset, so far as you recall, amongst your investigators?
I think they all had the same mindset. I think everybody believed that Horizon was showing the right figures, and therefore there was no need for us to go pouring through every single transaction.
And so given that mindset, when and in what circumstances was ARQ data obtained?
So I think the case that you've just shown me, where the postmaster has said something specific about certain transactions, and we would get the ARQ data and ask Fujitsu to explain what it was telling us.
And who was responsible for deciding whether to retrieve ARQ data or not?
So the investigator in the case would look at what they'd been told and what they'd seen, and they would make the request for the ARQ data. That would come into Casework, and I think it was just Graham, would then go to Fujitsu to explain what we wanted and why.
Was there any sort of vetting or supervision over when and in what circumstances ARQ data could or could not be requested?
I don't think so. I think in the case of an investigation, if the investigator asked for it, they'd have got it.
You told us earlier that it came at a cost.
Oh, yes.
Was cost irrelevant then?
To me, it was irrelevant. The way we managed it is if we'd gone over our numbers for a month, we would delay requests till the following month. I know we had discussions in the business. I know we had some quite forthright discussions on occasion on the basis that if we haven't got the evidence, we can't conduct an inquiry or a prosecution.
Forthright discussions with whom or amongst who?
So I had some discussions, I think there are some documents in here with the person that managed the Fujitsu account to say that we've got a job to do, and having Fujitsu say you can't have that because it's not in the contract isn't the answer. And obviously we were pushing for the business to increase the ARQ requests that we could obtain, because with Horizon cases becoming much more prevalent, there was going to be a need for us to use data much more. In the old days, with pension frauds and the like, Horizon data was irrelevant. We had the pension frauds, we had the pension foils and everything else we could get back.
At what point in an investigation, so post-audit, would the retrieval of ARQ data be considered?
I think it would be when the investigator was going through the summary and writing his report and looking at what he'd been told and what he knew, what the reports that he'd got from the office had told him, then he would look at whether he needed to go further.
I'm interested in particular whether it was pre or post charge. I know charges weren't in fact laid, but you know what I mean.
I would imagine that they would initially look for themselves, but once the case had gone to legal services and if it was going to Crown Court to counsel, then counsel or legal services would say you need to get Fujitsu data or a Fujitsu statement to say the system's robust.
You said, I would imagine they would look for themselves. Do you mean pre-charge they would obtain ARQ data?
I think, I don't know how the process works. I don't know whether AR, because of the constraints we had, I don't know whether there was any sort of limitation on not getting ARQ data until somebody had been charged. I would imagine not, because if you charge somebody, get ARQ data and find something that says it, you can't prosecute, then you've wasted your time going to counsel. So I don't know how exactly it worked, but I would imagine the investigators would consider whether they needed ARQ data before they finished their report. Bear in mind that after you've interviewed a suspect, you've got a limited time period to write your tape summaries and get your report in. So that may have been a constraint in itself.
If ARQ data was not requested in a particular case, what material would the Post Office rely on in proceedings in order to prove a loss?
I really can't remember. I didn't deal with any of these cases, so I don't know how that would have worked.
I mean, before Horizon came in, there were paper records generated by the branch.
Yes. And after Horizon came in, there were paper records generated by the branch using the Horizon system. But if
Yes.
Horizon's working perfectly, getting Horizon data isn't going to change the report. So I think the investigators would assume if Horizon's working fine and the reports are the reports, it's no different to having a manual report that the sub-postmaster's prepared.
Thank you very much, Mr. Utting. Sir, I wonder whether we might take our morning break.
Yeah, by all means.
Come back at 25:02, please.
Yeah, very well. See you then.
Thank you very much. Good morning, sir. Can you continue to see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Utting. We were just talking about when and in what circumstances a request for ARQ data would be made in an audit shortfall case. Can I just have a look at something in your witness statement, please, on that topic? So your witness statement at page 13, it will come up on the screen, please. Page 13, please, at the foot, page 32. So paragraph 32. Under the heading Analysing Horizon Data, Requesting ARQ Data from Fujitsu in Relationship with Fujitsu, you say, I'm asked what analysis would be undertaken of Horizon data by investigators when a shortfall was claimed to have been caused by Horizon. I've no recollection of what analysis would have been undertaken, as this would depend on the individual case. The cases I dealt with were predominantly about suppressing of transactions or fraudulent transactions, such as double counting or encashing stolen benefit books. In these cases, we'd want to have evidence of what transactions took place, when they took place, and who undertook them. We would match these up with the associated documentation to show that the system had been used fraudulently. And then this, in an audit shortage case, I'm not sure what Horizon would be able to tell us, though it's been a long time since I looked at one. The sentence there, in an audit shortage case, I'm not sure what Horizon would be able to tell us. Are you saying by that, I'm unclear what Horizon would be able to tell us, I just don't remember now? Or are you saying, I do not think that Horizon would be able to tell us much?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, it's a long time since I conducted an investigation into an audit shortage, and I'm not sure I ever did one in relation to Horizon. But as I said in the bit before, it would all depend on the case. And what the person had said at interview about how the loss had occurred?
If the person said in interview, and we've got quite a lot of interviews where people have said this, I know I didn't steal the money, and I don't believe my staff did, because I believe them to be people of honesty and integrity. They've worked for me for decades or whatever. But unexplained losses and discrepancies arose on Horizon, which I noticed at the time. I reported to the help desk or MBSC or both. What is your understanding of what Horizon data would be able to tell you as to the truth or accuracy of what they were saying?
I think you have to remember we're living in a world where we were told and believed that there was no problem with Horizon. So unless there was a transaction that could be pinpointed that caused the loss, and we were told that Horizon didn't generate such transactions, you weren't going to get to the bottom of that. So I don't know. I don't have. I've got quite a good memory, but this was 17 years ago. I don't know what I would have looked at or what an investigator would have looked at, but unless like in the case of I think it was Huey Thomas, where he actually said zero transactions in relation to card account, we'd be looking for a needle in a haystack that wasn't there. So I don't.
Or a needle in a haystack that turns out was there.
Potentially, yes. I don't know.
Can we look at some examples of how this unfolded in practice? And can we start, please, by looking at poll 00110269? Can you see that this is a report prepared by Jeff Hall, an investigation team manager for West, for you? And it's an interim report as at the 14th of October 2004 about the Blackwood office in Gwent, yes?
Yes.
And he says, Thursday the 23rd of September 2004, at about 10 a.m. I received a telephone call asking me if I was aware of large losses being incurred at Blackwood office. I explained my team were not involved in any inquiries. Chris proceeded to inform me that an audit conducted at the office that morning had confirmed a shortage of £435,984.12. And if we scroll down, please. On preparing the final account, the initial discrepancy was disturbed and reduced, resulting in a final figure of £435,293.44. He says, I immediately contacted Steve George, investigation manager, and dispatched him to the office to assist with the retention of transaction logs from the Horizon system and any further evidence that may assist with future inquiries. On his arrival, Steve was greeted by Graham Summers, retail line manager, who explained he'd been aware of the deficiency for some time and that he considered it to be a Horizon system problem. Steve obtained transaction history logs with the assistance of auditors. These have been now retained for examination and comparison with Fujitsu Horizon system data. Steve contacted me and explained that the total deficiency was as a result of an accumulation of large losses that had been declared and rolled in the office cash accounts since as far back as week 47. The losses have been dramatically increased. And then if we go to page 4, please. And pan out, please. In relation to the heading, the 28th of September, Mr. Hall narrates what happened when the sub-postmaster and his wife attended at the office where they were arrested and taken into custody. And then if we scroll to the second paragraph from the bottom, Mr. Hall tells us neither, that's Mr. and Mrs. Prosser, had any suspicions of staff under their employ, both claiming to trust them all implicitly. When they asked for an explanation of how these losses has occurred, both were adamant that their staff were honest and that the Horizon system was to blame. They claimed there had been problems since the Bureau was migrated from the Ford money changer to Horizon in February 2004. There was also mention of flashing lights on the keyboards whilst the terminals were not being used by staff, almost as if transactions were being ghosted. They were unable to explain any of the discrepancies and confirm they were not in a position to repay the outstanding monies. Then if we go forward to page 9, please. He concludes his report to you by saying, no evidence at present to suggest theft by postmaster or staff. Losses, in my opinion, have undoubtedly been facilitated by a lack of procedural security within the office and a failure to secure interconnecting door with Royal Mail. If there was no evidence of theft, that can come down, thank you, and allegations, as we've seen, by the sub-postmaster of problems with Horizon, what should have been done to investigate those?
So I think from an investigation perspective, my team was there to investigate criminal offences. And if there was no criminal offence, effectively, it wasn't our role to investigate the Horizon system. Our role was to investigate potential criminal offences. What should have happened, looking back, is that somebody, and I note that I think it was the terminals in the office and their personal computer were mirrored. Somebody should have looked through that to see if there was anything in the system that would facilitate the loss. But I think that would probably be something that, if we weren't going to be involved because there was no criminality or evidence of criminality, the business should then have been going to Fujitsu to say, you need to pore over this and look at what's transpired. I don't think my team would have had the necessary skills or experience to analyse an IT system.
Does it follow from those answers that once the conclusion had been reached that there was no crime, or no sufficient evidence of crime to progress the matter, that was the end of the matter so far as the investigation team were concerned?
I can't remember because it was a long time ago. I think the problems with the case, and I think I was actually involved in interviewing one of the senior managers here, was that if you're going to pursue anybody for theft, then you can't do that if you knew what they were doing. And the people in Post Office Limited knew these losses were occurring and accumulating, not in my team, but in the business. And if the business knew these losses were occurring and were letting the postmaster increase them week in, and albeit hiding them in the system, then that's not dishonest because they were telling the business what they were doing, and therefore you wouldn't be able to prove theft anyway.
Who within the post office should have taken up the baton after that last sentence had been written, nonetheless to investigate what the sub-postmaster was saying about Horizon? I
think, and I'm not an expert here, I don't know where it went. I've seen a document, I think I was given a document Wednesday or Sunday, that I think they pursued the postmaster civilly for the loss, or something went on. So whoever was going to take on the baton of dealing with the loss should have been instigating an investigation to understand what the postmaster was saying and whether there was anything in there. I would have. It's easy now because we all know what's gone on, but this was an opportunity for the business to do a proper root and branch review of if their loss is this big, and this is nearly £500,000, then in my head, and I'm not an expert, it justifies spending some money to get some proper, experienced, intelligent view looking at the system.
Did there ever come a time when there was such a collection of cases or collection of allegations about problems with Horizon that kind of root and branch review was done?
Not while I was there. When I was there, there were relatively few cases, and we had discussions. I was involved in some other cases, I'm sure we'll discuss them, whereby there were allegations against the system, but we were living in a world with 57,000 counter positions and 11,000 or 14,000 branches, and there were probably less than 10 cases where postmasters were making allegations at this time. So we would have asked the question, is there a problem? And we were getting the answer back, there is no problem. This is just people making allegations.
Can I turn then to some of that account and begin by looking at poll 00107426? This is an email exchange from November 2005. And can we start, please, at page 5? And just scroll down. Can you see this is signed off by litigation team leader, company secretary's office, legal services.
Yeah.
And it's a Mandy Talbot email. If we go back to page 3, please. Can we see the beginning of the email there from Mandy Talbot? And it's the 23rd of November 2005 to, amongst others, you.
Yes.
Can you help us, looking at that cast list on the distribution and the copy list, what that collection of people represents?
Dave Smith, I think, was in charge of IT at the time, I think. Jennifer Robson, I'm not sure. I think she might have been in the legal team, but I'm not sure. Me, Rod Ismay was my boss. He was in charge of product and branch accounting. I'm not sure if he was at that stage, but he was involved with the finance side of the business. I think Claire Waldle was a solicitor. Nikki Sherratt, I don't recall. Mandy she was a civil litigation lawyer.
And you can see the title, Challenge to Horizon.
Yeah.
And this email essentially summarises 2 cases, the Castleton case and the Bajaj case. And in relation to the Castleton case, you see it says summary of facts. And in paragraph 1, there's a high-level summary. Proceedings have been issued by the Post Office against Lee Castleton for £27,000. It was known by the business prior to issue that Lee Castleton blamed Horizon for losses. External solicitors were asked to check with the Fujitsu liaison team and to assure themselves that the evidence in respect of Horizon was sound before the issue of proceedings. There had been no security investigation, so the data had not been requested from Fujitsu. And then if we go forward to page 5, please. Following the summary, and I'm not going to read out the summary, we've looked at it before. She says under issues, in each case, that's both the Castleton case and the Bajaj case, the postmasters are challenging the validity of data provided by the Horizon system, and the cases became litigious before that evidence could be properly investigated. In each case, it was known that Horizon was going to be challenged, but there was no procedure in place to acquire the necessary data identify somebody with relevant knowledge and capacity to interpret the data and report on the same. If the challenge is not met, the ability of the Post Office to rely on Horizon for data will be compromised, and the future prosperity of the network compromised. Fujitsu's reputation will be affected. So this is Mrs. Talbot briefing some relatively senior staff at the Post Office, giving a warning about the collection of data concerning the reliability of Horizon and the potential for the compromise of future proceedings and compromise the reliance on Horizon itself. Yes?
Yes.
There was a reference, we skipped over it, I'm not going to go back to it, to there being a meeting between Tony, Rod and David and external solicitors being arranged to discuss the best way forwards. Did you attend any meeting with Rod Ismay, David Smith, the IT David Smith, and external solicitors, with or without Ms. Talbot, to discuss the way forwards in relation to the issues that she's identified?
I don't recall, but I may well have done. I did attend meetings with Dave Smith, and obviously Rod Ismay was my boss, so I spent a lot of time with Rod, but I don't recall any specific meetings, but that doesn't mean I didn't go to one.
Can I turn to a meeting that took place a couple of weeks after this, but not with external solicitors? And that's by looking at poll 0014-2539. Now, this is a relatively new series of documents for the inquiry, which may be significant given the date of these meetings. We're going to look at the agenda first and then the minutes of the meeting. For the inquiry, this is relatively early in the piece because it's November and December 2005. Can you see the agenda for a meeting of the 6th of December 2005?
Yes, I can.
And it's in the Juniper Room at Cotton House in Rugby. What was that? What was
So Cotton House was the management training centre for the Post Office. Well, it's sort of all of Royal Mail. Juniper Room.
The room doesn't matter,
Just
but
the name of one of the rooms.
the Cotton House in Rugby.
Yeah.
That's not where these people worked, is it?
No, Cotton House was a management training centre, but there were meeting rooms there. We used to hold a yearly get-together of the whole investigation team, and we usually did it there because as a training centre, it also had accommodation block.
And so how significant an event would it be to pull this collection of people together at the training centre in Rugby?
With the training centre, we had meeting rooms, so anyone could use it. We had quite diverse teams across the country, so Rugby is a reasonably central point, so people would join up there. Some of these guys worked in Chesterfield, and others worked in London. So Rugby was probably, it's right next to the M6, so it's...
So I shouldn't read anything into the facts?
It's not a massive, we've sold it now, it's not a massively important building.
Okay. Just looking at page 3 of this note, we can see the agenda, 10 o'clock, introduction, required output, shared understanding of the meeting objectives, common understanding under 2 of who currently does what, lessons learned, process gaps under 3, and problems logged on flip charts. And so if we scroll down, lunch between 12 and 12:45, and then if we carry on over the page, finish at 2:45. So a reasonably substantial meeting. Back to page 1, please. And if we look at the list of proposed attendees, does that include some relatively senior people from within the business?
I don't know the relevant seniority of all of those people. They were probably more of a working group, subordinate to a more senior group, but I don't know.
Did you have any dealings with, you remember, Keith Baines?
I did have dealings with Keith Baines. He was the person I usually spoke to when we got into heated discussions about ARQ requests and the amount of data we were allowed to get from Horizon. Keith, I think, managed the contract with them, and he was bounded by the contract, which wasn't always helpful. I think Marie worked for Rod Ismay. I think Mike Gallagher probably worked for John Smith. Dave Holbert, I can't remember who he worked for. He may have been Dave Smith as well. John Legg was part of the network services team. Jennifer Robson would have worked for Rod Ismay as well, I believe. Obviously, Mandy Talbot Ward worked for me.
And so do you think you asked Mr. Ward to attend this?
Quite possibly. Either myself or Rod would have asked me who was the best person, and as Graham was the casework manager and managed the ARQ requests, he was probably the most skilled person to be there.
We've seen the email exchange at the end of November,
yes,
with the proposal for a meeting being arranged. That said, with external solicitors. Looking back, do you think this might be the meeting that was in fact arranged?
It may well have been. It may have been an initial discussion to find out what the issues were and what could be done before they instigated discussions with externals.
So we've got a range of teams represented from across the business here.
Yes.
And if we scroll down, the heading is in Horizon Integrity. Background, there have been several recent cases where sub-postmasters have cited errors in the Horizon system as explanations for discrepancies in their accounts, either as part of a challenge against the termination of their contracts or in challenging the Post Office's right to recover error notices, transaction corrections from their remuneration. Recently, a letter was published in the Postmaster in November, that was apparently enclosed, asking readers to send in details of incidents where they believed that Horizon has caused errors in their accounts. Lawyers acting on behalf of a sub-postmaster currently in dispute with the Post Office have written stating they're contemplating a joint action on behalf of a number of current and former sub-postmasters. This would challenge the accounting integrity of the Horizon system and Post Office's right to make transaction corrections and recover resulting debts based on Horizon data. Would you agree that the way that matters are described there is a bit more than a small number of cases against 14 or 19,000 branches?
I don't know. I think you can read it that way, but at the time we were assured that there weren't any problems, and we didn't see. You have to remember, we're the criminal investigation team, and what was going on in civil was almost invisible to us, other than cases where we were asked to support, as in the Castleton case. We wouldn't know how many cases there were. It's easy to look back and say this should have been a prompt to do something, but at the time, with all the other things that we were dealing with, I wouldn't have considered this to be massively significant to me.
The note continues. In one past case, Cleveley's Post Office settled out of court following an adverse report on Horizon's potential to cause errors from an expert appointed by the court. Fujitsu advised that the report was not well-founded, but Post Office and Fujitsu were not able to persuade the expert to change it. This report was largely based on a review of help desk logs, since it related to events more than 18 months prior to the case, and Horizon transaction data was retained for 18 months only. And then skipping the next paragraph, the above was discussed at a meeting called by Dave Smith on the 25th of November, and as a result, urgent actions have been taken to support current live cases. And this workshop organised to recommend further actions to reduce this risk area in future. Meeting purpose: to review the issues and recommend: 1, who manages dealings with sub-postmasters and their lawyers relating to actual or potential civil cases? What processes are required to identify as early as possible those cases that have a Horizon aspect? Who needs to be involved in such cases, and how will they be coordinated? Are any new processes required with Fujitsu to obtain data analysis and reports or witness statements for civil cases? And then 3, is there a need for an independent expert to be appointed in advance who could, on request, provide evidence to the court in such cases? If so, what exactly would the expert's role be? What qualification and qualities are needed in such an expert? And how will we go about appointing one? What preliminary work would be required to get the expert up to speed? 4, who will act as the client briefing external lawyers and facilitating their obtaining relevant information in these cases? And then over the page 5, what are the budget implications of the above? And then there's the agenda. So would you agree that there's a recognition here of the fact that there was no process of collating information about cases in which the integrity of accounting information produced by Horizon was being raised and challenged, and making such information available to all functions across the post office?
There was. I don't think there was. I think everything we saw was piecemeal. There was no coordinated.
Can we go to the minutes of the meeting themselves and see what was decided? That's poll 00119895. We can see attendees who in fact turned up, and I think it's per the cast list that we saw on the agenda.
Yes.
Under findings, if we scroll down, please. Findings. There's no generally understood process for identifying emerging cases in which the integrity of accounting information produced by Horizon may become an issue. There are a number of channels by which such cases may enter post office, and there's no process for making information about them available to all relevant functions. This increases the risk that different parts of the business may be dealing with the same issue and not coordinate responses. Would you agree that those two findings, taken together, 1 and 2, present a serious risk or a serious problem?
I think they do. I'm not sure that that's entirely accurate, because I don't think there would ever be a criminal investigation at the same time as there was a civil litigation case going on. I don't think debt recovery would be active whilst there was an investigation going on, though, because one would generally feed the other. I do agree that there was no process across the business, that nobody knew how many Horizon issue cases there were. And if civil litigation had got cases, they wouldn't tell investigations. And certainly if the case never involved an investigator, the debt recovery team wouldn't have involved us.
The focus on coordinating a response as between criminal and civil proceedings is one risk, isn't it? But isn't there another more important and serious problem identified? Namely, that the whole picture was not being assessed by anyone within the post office, so that the number of people raising the issue of Horizon integrity was not being assessed.
No, it wasn't. I think going back to what was in the agenda, reading the agenda now, you can see that we're still living in a world where everybody thinks Horizon's fine and dandy and there aren't any issues, and the agenda would tend to lean towards, we know there are no problems with Horizon, but what do we do about identifying the number of cases and dealing with them? I don't think, and we've all got the benefit of hindsight, I don't think that the agenda was as open as maybe it could have been.
I missed that last part. I don't think it...
I don't think the agenda was as open as it could have been.
Point 3, the transaction logs that can be obtained from Fujitsu via audit query requests, that's ARQs, provide the data that's required for the investigation of claimed anomalies in particular cases. However, interpretation of this data is not simple. It requires a considerable level of understanding of branch transaction and accounting processes and how these are implemented on Horizon, as well as the skills to analyse such data using PC-based tools. And so this is dealing with the need for understanding and technical skill and not just the provision of the raw data from ARQs.
I think so, yes.
4, Fujitsu's price for providing the data and for skilled resource to analyse and report on it is high, and the capacity provided in the contract is currently is fully used to support investigations relating to potential criminal offences. And then 5, to date, the number of cases in which the integrity of Horizon data has been an issue is small. However, recent correspondence in the sub-postmaster may well cause an increase. Also, there may also be an effect from the introduction of transaction corrections replacing error notices. The NFSP has had no involvement in cases to date. This is expected to continue unless there was considerable momentum for a change of policy from their membership. Just pausing there, why would there be an effect from the introduction of transaction corrections replacing error notices in the number of cases in which the integrity of Horizon data was raised?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. My understanding of transaction corrections were that they were error notices, but they were done automatically instead of sending an error notice to the branch for them to bring to account. So if there was an error that could be shown to be an error, then there shouldn't have been an issue with a transaction correction being implemented.
7 and 8, challenges to Horizon data integrity may arise late in the process, for example, following a suspension or issue of a late account. If all potential cases were to require Horizon data to be analysed early in the process, then the workload would be considerable and much would later prove unnecessary. Currently, there are around 12 suspensions per week, and a significant proportion of them will relate to financial discrepancies. Most of these are subsequently settled by agreement or are not contested. Where a case does go to court, it's essential that Post Office is able to refute any suggestion that Horizon is unreliable in general, or that it could have caused specific losses to the sub-postmaster bringing the case. The evidence needed for these 2 points will be different. And so that's reflecting the fact, isn't it, that one might have general evidence as to the reliability of Horizon versus an individualised investigation in relation to the losses said to have occurred in that branch and how Horizon was not responsible for those losses. Yes?
Sorry, yes.
So paragraphs 10 to 13, for the general point, evidence will need to be in the form of a credible expert opinion that confirms that the system has been designed, built and operated in accordance with good practice and that its overall performance provides confidence that it is operating as intended. On the specific errors claimed to have been caused in a particular case, evidence will need to show by reporting a detailed analysis of the transactions and other system log entries that recorded at the branch that the system recorded transactions and calculated accounts accurately, and the transaction data is an accurate record of what was recorded in the branch at the time transactions took place. 13, such evidence will be given greater weight by a court if it's provided by an expert who is distanced from the post office and Fujitsu. Evidence will need to be given by the person who carried out the analysis. This may mean in some circumstances an independent expert would need to repeat analysis for himself that post office or Fujitsu had already carried out. And then recommendations. A coordination role should be established to maintain a list of all current civil cases and potential civil cases where accuracy of Horizon accounting information may be an issue, and ensure that all relevant business functions are made aware of these cases. So far as you are aware, was such a coordination role established?
I don't recall. I think I discussed it with Rod and with Mandy at various points, and I think with Keith Baines as well. Whether it actually ever came into fruition, I can't recall.
Can you recall anyone ever actually holding that role?
No.
Was there any equivalent role established in relation to criminal cases? Namely, somebody maintaining a list, and this is as early as 2005, of the cases in which the accuracy of Horizon accounting information was called into question.
I don't recall so.
Would you agree that, just like this recommendation for civil cases, there would have been good sense in doing so in relation to criminal cases?
Yes.
And that's so that the business as a whole can understand the nature and extent of the allegations being made.
Yes, but if we did it in, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have done, if we did it in investigations, I think at that time we had very few, unless everybody else was doing it, what we were doing wasn't going to be that helpful. But you're right, the business should have done it.
Quite aside from allowing the business to gain a better understanding of the, at that time, alleged problems with Horizon, it may have also assisted in discharging disclosure obligations in criminal proceedings.
Yes.
2, briefing is required primarily for the contracts and service managers, but for all staff dealing with sub-postmasters, setting out business policy, lines to take, and how to identify potential emerging cases. Can you remember, as a result of this time period, lines to take being developed about problems with Horizon?
I don't believe so. We were under the impression, and everybody we spoke to told us there was no problem with Horizon. We may have suggested when we interviewed people that there were no problems and that Horizon wasn't at fault. I don't know if we...
So that itself was the line to take?
Well, it was, but I don't know if we gave any formal instruction to investigators that that's the line they should have taken. I think when I was an investigator, I tended not to tell people things because I was asking questions.
Well, you wouldn't offer your view of the position. You would try and get information from them.
Yes. My role as an investigator, I thought, was to gather evidence, not tell people things. We did that when we did put the case file together and did disclosure.
And it's not the view of it's not the position of an investigator to offer his or her subjective view on an issue in the course of an interview, is it?
I wouldn't. Some may. I wouldn't. When we were trained to deal with facts and not give opinions. So during the course of an interview, I wouldn't have been expressing opinions about things. I'd have just been asking questions.
Then if we go over the page, please, to paragraph 4. Oh, sorry, back please. Yeah, paragraph 4, thank you. Fujitsu's price for providing the data and for skilled resource we've gone wrong somewhere. I'm looking at page 4. Thank you. Appointing an external expert is likely to give the best results in court. The expert will need to be able to testify both on the overall status of Horizon and related systems and on the analysis of data relating to individual cases. Such an expert may be needed for the Castleton Marine Drive case after February the 7th. Therefore, discussions with Fujitsu should be initiated on the role, terms of reference, and access to Fujitsu staff and information for such an expert advice. For such an expert, I think that should be full stop. Advice should be obtained from Peter Corbett on the desirability of using our external auditors to provide such an expert, even though such a person may be seen as less independent by a court. So this is recommending the appointment of an expert external to Post Office and Fujitsu, with discussions initiated with Fujitsu on the role that this person is going to perform.
Yes.
Did that happen?
Not to my recollection. It may have, the discussions took place. I don't know if it ever got beyond a discussion.
Were you ever aware of an expert being appointed in criminal cases external to Fujitsu and the Post Office on the prosecution side?
I don't recall any while I was there.
Would these minutes have been fed back to you? Would Graham Ward, your essentially your deputy at the meeting?
He may have done, but he may have, because he was representing the investigation team. It was a business initiative. He probably did send me the minutes and I probably did read them, but we were a contributor to this, not a leader. So I don't know if we would have taken any actions on the basis of what was in here.
But we've seen from Mandy Talbot's email, on which you were
Yes.
a copyee, that there were a number of cases in which the integrity of Horizon was being called into question by a
Yes.
number of sub-postmasters.
Yes.
And there was a meeting arranged at which representatives of different parts of the business joined together to reach a consensus as what needed to be done.
Yes.
And there's some pretty clear recommendations here
Yes.
that do not seem to be implemented in practice.
No, I think the action point we've just been looking at suggests that, and it would probably not be one of the people in that meeting, but Rod Ismay would probably be approaching Peter Corbett with regards to where to go with it. Because I worked for Rod and so did some of the more senior people in that room, and Rod was a direct report to Peter, so if anyone was going to talk to Peter, it would probably have been Rod. I think our role in that meeting was because we held the key to the ARQ requests, and part of Graham's function would have been to preserve our ability to get data we needed for criminal cases, as well as giving advice on how to do it for other departments. I think the biggest issue was there was a contractual limit on how much data could be attained, and for reasons that I don't know, the limit also included that it needed to be for investigations and prosecutions. So there was going to need to be a fundamental review of what data we could get from them in order for this to be progressed, and that wasn't something for the investigation team to deal with.
We can see who walked away from the meeting with actions by scrolling down. And a bit more, please. I'm going to skip over 1 and 2. but 3 was left to Mr. Baines, Keith Baines, to prepare and circulate to meeting attendees a first draft of a business policy document on Horizon, including guidance on what should be said to sub-postmasters raising concerns and why, and that document should also provide guidance on how to recognise potential cases. DH Dave Holbert to propose a process for coordinating businesses' response to potential cases. And then lastly, Keith Baines to discuss the need for and terms of reference of an external expert with Fujitsu. And then over the page at 6, Mr. Baines, again, the third action that he had to brief Dave Smith on the meeting's recommendations. Would that be Dave Smith, IT Dave Smith, or Managing Director Dave Smith?
I'm just trying to think. That I think Alan Cook was still there then, so it would have been Dave Smith, but I think he was Operations Director. I can't recall his role. I think he had something to do with operations, not just IT, but I may be wrong.
Looking at this as a whole, would you agree that some fairly serious concerns were being raised here about the way in which the business was responding to challenges made by sub-postmasters to the accuracy and reliability of Horizon?
Yes, that's right.
That a series of actions were raised, including one to record and coordinate the number and nature of the challenges, and 2, to consider the appointment of an independent expert to report on both Horizon's generic reliability and on individual challenges that were made.
Yes.
And so far as you're aware, were neither of those things done?
I don't recall. There were other discussions that we had. There were other emails in the bundle around discussions that I'd had with Keith Baines and Mandy about what we should do and how we should do it. I think we discussed it probably in my one-to-ones with Rod, but as I say, Rod was the person in charge of that area. And I don't know how much involvement we would have had other than being the experts in the AOQ process.
Can I turn to the preparation of case files, please?
Yes.
That can come down, thank you. You tell us in your witness statements, paragraph 22, it needn't come up, the process for the preparation of a case file to be submitted to Casework and then on to the lawyers within the criminal law team. Can we look, please, at some practical examples of this? Firstly, poll 0010 4747. Can we look, please, at paragraph 3.2 to start with, which is on page 3. Thank you. And so this is a policy setting out the creation of casework files and the submission of casework files. It says as its purpose, I skipped over it and I shouldn't have done, the aim of the policy is to ensure adequate controls are in place to maintain standards throughout the investigation process.
Yes.
It's dated January 2000 and, so it's effective from March 2000. Can you see there's a list of the documents that needed to be included from the 4th and 5th bullet points in the file. Enclosure envelope should be used to enclose the following supporting documents. Appendix A,
Yeah.
Original statements and, where appropriate, copies of original exhibits, appendices B and C, etc. And then there's a long list of documents.
Yep.
Yes?
Yes.
We can see amongst the long list of documents to be included within appendices B and C, about 6 down, disclosure forms. What were disclosure forms?
In this context, I'm not entirely sure. They may have been the disclosure forms that we would use later when we came to produce a committal bundle. That could possibly be what they were.
Do you mean the
Sensitive.
what we
unused,
might
the
know
unused, and the report, yeah.
as schedules of sensitive and non-sensitive
That's the one.
unused material? Can we look, please, at poll 0006 4235? This is an example. I've picked Miss Hamilton's case as an example. Can you see this is headed up Disclosure Officer's Report?
Yes.
Is that, if we just pan out a little bit, please? Just so you can see the whole thing. And then look over the page. And the next page. And if you see at the foot of the page, bottom left, there is a generic description of the document as a CS 006E report. Can you see that?
I might be able to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
And that's on each page. So this is a disclosure officer's report, rather than, I think, a schedule of sensitive or non-sensitive material. If we go back to page 1, please. And look at the rubric underneath the heading. The form says the following items are listed on the schedules for this case and may undermine the prosecution case, primary disclosure, or assist the defence case, secondary disclosure, and or are required to be supplied under section 7.3 of the code, delete as appropriate. And so this is requiring in a disclosure officer's report to identify any unused material which might undermine the prosecution case or assist the defence.
Yes.
Which is, in a compressed way, essentially the test under the 1996 Act for Disclosure.
I just followed I don't know the legal stuff.
Okay. It also states that the list will include material that's required to be supplied under section 7.3 of the code. What would you understand that to be a reference to?
I probably knew 17 years ago.
But you don't know?
I wouldn't have the first idea today.
And then the first 2 columns, the schedule and the item number, can you see that they've got an asterisk next to them?
Yes.
And if we go down to the bottom of the page, a bit further, can you see the asterisk is picked up?
Yes.
Enter either the CS 006C or
Yep.
CS 006C and enter item number from the schedule.
Yes.
We know that they're a reference respectively to the documents or the form representing in the first instance, non-sensitive, and in the second instance, sensitive, unused schedules. So if we move up to the top of the page again, the documents requiring the author to set out which schedule the document appears on, whether it's a sensitive or a non-sensitive schedule, and then the item on that schedule.
Yes.
Yes? Does it follow that in order to submit a casework file to the criminal law team for a charging decision, a post office investigator should have completed both the schedules of unused material in both species and a disclosure report before doing so?
I can't recall exactly. I know they had to produce the first two. I'm not sure, and I don't think anyone was ever really sure who the disclosure officer actually was. I think that a lot of emphasis was placed on the first two schedules. On this one, I'm not entirely sure. I would imagine that they would produce both the schedules and this one.
But you can't recall the stage at the process at which that occurred?
No.
Whether it was before submission of the file to the criminal lawyer
I think,
or
I
after
think
a charging decision had been made?
I think this was usually done after. I think this was done as part of the committal bundle.
Does that mean that the reviewing lawyer wouldn't have seen the unused material?
No. If there was anything in the evidence that helped the defence or undermined the prosecution, it would have been brought to the lawyer's attention at the time the report was written. But it would probably...
By what means?
Probably in the body of the report.
Can we just look at paragraph 31 of your witness statement, please?
I might have that wrong. I don't recall when these forms were completed.
Can we just look at paragraph 31 of your witness statement, which is on page 12? If we scroll down, you say, I've been asked to consider two documents, casework management documents, one of which I took you to a moment ago. I've no memory of these specific documents, but I recognise what they are, and I believe these would have been circulated to all investigators as part of a security circular when I was an investigator. And then over the page, please. 3 lines in. Bullet point 4 of page 2 is an instruction as to what to include on an operational or procedure failures report and where to put this on the disclosure forms. I believe this would have applied to any bugs, errors or defects in the Horizon system that could have an impact on a prosecution. Compliance checks were undertaken in all cases to ensure that the content requirements were met, etc. And so, are you saying there that in relation to procedural failings, they ought to be identified both in the disclosure forms and in the report, the investigating officer's report?
In the report in the case file, I don't think it changed in my time, but any operational procedural failures would be included in the report in the case file. They may not have been included in the discipline file, but I know the report's moved around a little bit, but there was always a duty to ensure that anything that potentially undermined a prosecution was brought to the solicitor's attention at the start.
You said in the course of that answer they may not have been included in the discipline report. Why was that?
Yeah. It would depend on what it was. If it was they kept leaving the safe open or they shared tills, I believe that would have been included.
Was it because the discipline report went straight to the suspect?
No, I don't believe we would ever do anything that we thought. Bear in mind, the suspect would have had all those things discussed with them at interview, they would know what we were going to say. I don't think, it's a long time ago, I don't think we would ever have deliberately not told something to a suspect, because if we picked up procedural issues, they would have been discussed with anybody who's been interviewed under caution while we were interviewing them, because obviously if we're going to conduct a prosecution and we're talking about potential failures in procedure that could have facilitated a loss, we'd have to discuss them with the suspect in interview, because otherwise what's the point of conducting a prosecution? You've got to establish what they've got to say about things.
You tell us in your witness statement, this can come down elsewhere, paragraph 22, that bugs, errors and defects in Horizon would have counted as the sort of procedural failing that the guidance that we've looked at was intended to cover.
I would think so, yes.
Did you ever see bugs, errors or defects in Horizon listed on a disclosure report or in a schedule of unused material, whether sensitive or non-sensitive?
I don't recall ever seeing them, but I don't know that I would necessarily have seen the schedules, because in my role, I don't know if I would have needed to see the schedules.
You've anticipated my next question. What did you get as the DPA, the designated prosecuting authority, when, in terms of schedules of used and unused material, when you were making a decision?
So when I was making, it depended. I sat upstairs from the casework team, so if I was on site, I would probably be sent the case file, and I would read the entire case file.
And that would include schedules of sensitive
if they were there, yes.
And non-sensitive?
Yes, because if I saw anything in a case file that suggested that there was a reason the prosecution might be at risk, then I would probably want to discuss it with the solicitor. If I wasn't on site, I would, if there was an urgent need to do something, they would have sent me the report, the tape summaries, any interim reports, and the advice from the solicitor in order for me to make a decision.
The schedules of sensitive and non-sensitive unused, were they the responsibility of the disclosure officer in the case?
Yes.
Was there any process of a reviewing lawyer checking them?
I believe that they were always checked by the lawyer.
And what does checking, or what did checking involve?
Reading through the schedules, making sure anything that was on the two front schedules, if necessary, was included on the third schedule, probably ensuring, and I don't know how much of this was based on trust, that the investigator included everything that needed to be included on the schedules.
That's quite an important qualification, the extent to which it was based on trust. To what extent was there intrusive oversight of the completion of schedules of unused material by reviewing lawyers?
I can't say for definite, bearing in mind that the National Investigation Team were spread across the land, and the solicitors who took the initial advice were all based in Croydon and then in Victoria. They wouldn't have had the ability to go to an investigator's office in Scotland and check that he'd included everything on his schedules. It was very much down to the investigators to ensure that all of their evidence was included.
And so investigators were essentially responsible for what went on a schedule and what didn't?
Initially, yes, definitely.
Initially, when did the position change?
No, if during the course of a case,
yes,
the barrister asked a question or solicitor asked a question about something, that there could be an occasion where something was referred to in an investigation report, and then when you looked in the schedules, it wasn't there, so then the solicitor would come back and say, well, you've mentioned this, it's not on the schedules, can we make sure it's on the schedule, and can you check to see if there's anything else?
Thank you. So I'm about to turn to a separate topic, Mr. Utting's role as the designated prosecuting authority, and look at some case studies. I wonder whether we might break until 1:45.
Yes, of course.
Thank you very much.